Excellencies, distinguished members of the Turkish-American Associations, and also next to President Mehmet Toy, also a hello to the newly elected President, Mr. Kenan Çağlar. It is indeed a privilege, a pleasure, even an honor to be present at this 35th annual Turkish-American Conference. This may not be the best of the times to be addressing to you at lunch, but I think the topic will be of interest to all of you. My only worry is that I hope it will not spoil your appetite, because we are not going to talk of all very nice things. Distinguished participants, last year we commemorated the centenary of the start of the First World War. That war was one of the deadliest and most destructive wars in history. For the first time, chemical weapons were used in this war. The human cost of that war was more than 9 million military, around 10 million civilian deaths, and around 21 million wounded soldiers. When prisoners of war and missing people are added, the number of total casualties go even higher. By the end of the First World War, 4 empires, namely the German Empire, Austria-Hungarian Empire, Russian Empire, and the Ottoman Empire, perished from history. So, with this very brief introduction, one can see that the First World War was one of the most tragic times of our modern history. Only the tragedies of the Second World War, of which this year we commemorate the 70th anniversary of its ending, could overshadow the calamities of those times of the First World War. Now, for the Ottoman Empire, the tragic times lasted much longer than the First World War. It began with the Balkan Wars of 1911 and came to an end with the establishment of the Republic of Turkey in 1923. More than a decade-long fighting and great human and material loss. During these years, more than a decade, up to 5 million Turks perished due to wars, ethnic cleansings, and adverse conditions during forced migrations. In those years, millions of them came to Anatolia as refugees. Today, the population of Turkey is composed of the descendants of these people, whose very right to live and right to live in their homelands were denied. As the saying goes, those who lost a homeland knows the worth of the homeland. Today, however, here in this hall, we are looking more specifically into the tragedy that befell on the Armenians living in the Ottoman Empire. There is no denial of the fact that Armenians living in the war zone in the eastern part of the Ottoman Empire during the First World War were ordered to leave their homes to resettle in the less vulnerable southern regions of the empire, today's Syria and Iraq, by the law of resettlement of May 1915. One common mistake made, they were not deported outside of the borders of the Ottoman Empire. They were resettled, according to the title of the military law, then temporarily within the borders of the Ottoman Empire. It is a very sad fact that during the World War I resettlement process, there have been casualties, first and foremost due to unhospitable conditions during the war, and attacks of irregular bandits, as well as the misconduct of some administrative and military authorities. It is another fact that the Ottoman authorities during the war, that is to say, within the war, put on trial over 1,300 administrative and military personnel and civilians for the abuse of the resettlement process, and many of them were given harsh punishments, including death penalty. This was even before the conclusion of the war. The Ottoman authorities, on their own sovereign discretion, tried and punished those who were responsible for the mishandling of the Armenians. It must also be remembered that many Armenians left their towns and villages in eastern Anatolia with the withdrawing Russian army. Many of them died while fighting in the Russian army. Also, many died because of harsh living conditions and even starvation in the Armenian Republic in the South Caucasus. The cumulative result of all these, not just the resettlement, was a calamity for the Armenians during and following the First World War. Now, I'm telling you all this, but what are we disputing today then? It's not the Armenian tragedy. What we are disputing today are fundamentally three issues. One, presentation of those tragic events as one of policy of genocide. Two, the numbers game and the multiplication on the number of the casualties in order to further dramatize the wartime losses. And three, denial of the sufferings of the Muslims and Turks at the hands of the Armenians in collaboration with the Tsarist Russian army. So I go on these three issues in more detail. Genocide is a legal term defined by the 1948 Convention on the Prevention and Punishment of the Crime of Genocide. It is strictly a legal term. I know that there are many jurists in this audience, and I don't have to go further on this. Even large numbers of human deaths alone, by the definition of the 1948 Convention, cannot be labeled as genocide. An event can be legally characterized as genocide only following a valid court judgment, as Article 6 of the 1948 Convention clearly states. Until then, until such a court verdict, representation of an event as genocide has no standing, has no bearing. This is the basic principle of the modern law. This principle must be known and respected. I also, in this connection, want to remind the recent international court verdicts which shed ample light on why such an accusation against Turkey has no merits. I'll come to that a bit more in detail later on. Now, the second point I want to mention, the numbers game, is also disturbing. Today, Armenian propaganda alleges 1.5 million victims of the genocide. To be exact, 1.5 million innocent victims is the jargon. The number of 1.5 million is an audacious falsification. It is true that the exact number of the losses cannot be determined. However, given that in the 1910s, the number of the Armenians in the Ottoman Empire was hardly around 1.5 million, reveals the illogical propaganda of the 1.5 million victims. Scholarly studies, on the other hand, give numbers between 300,000 and 600,000 as to the Armenian losses. Also, as I mentioned, scholars believe around 190,000 Armenians died while fighting the Ottoman army within the ranks of the Russian army, and around 200,000 Armenians vanished in the First Armenian Republic in the South Caucasus because of famine and other harsh living conditions. What is certain, however, is 518,105 Turks were killed by the Russian and Armenian soldiers and irregulars within 7 years between 1914 and 1921. This number is almost exact because archival documents composed of official reports of the time show this number. And until now, no one, including the Armenian and Armenophile circles, challenged this number. I personally regret talking about the number of human losses. I think we all believe, neither bigger numbers make a tragedy bigger, nor smaller numbers lessen it. After all, whatever the numbers are, all sufferings sadden us as members of the human community. I also believe numbers game is disrespectful to the people who suffered during the World War I. Thus, instrumentalization of human sufferings for political purposes not banalize human losses. Is this an ethical and moral thing? I do not think so. Instrumentalization of the human sufferings for political purposes brings me to my third point. Denial of the sufferings of the Muslims and Turks at the hands of the Armenians and through their collaboration with the Tsarist Russian army. We cannot accept one-sided, self-centered, biased representation of the wartime atrocities. If our goal is to overcome problems rooted in history and to build peaceful and neighborly relations, then acknowledgement of the sufferings of all sides should be an imperative. I would like to draw your attention to an important point with this regard. From the 1890s to mid-1920s, that is to say until the foundation of the Turkish Republic, thousands of pages of reports, political pamphlets, petitions, newspaper articles, and memoirs were published in the United States. These almost always contained notably derogatory and racist ideas against the Turks. Remarkably, an important portion of these were published by the missionary organizations that were heavily biased against the Muslims and who lobbied hard for the partition of the Ottoman Empire. Historical studies show these groups also did everything possible for the establishment of an Armenian homeland, independent or with a certain degree of autonomy within Turkey. Now, curiously, between mid-1920s and up till 1970s, there were few or none at all of publications of this sort. Moreover, until 1970s, there was not visible collective enmity of Armenians in the Western countries and in the United States towards Turkey and the Turks. Turks who had met Armenians in these countries at those years, at that time interval, most often than not, tell their encounters with the Armenians as pleasant instances like the reunion of friends that were drifted apart. However, by 1970s, things began to change. An Armenian American assassinated the Turkish Consul General in Los Angeles and his second in charge, the consul, in California in 1973. This was an individual act motivated by hatred. In 1975, however, an organized terror campaign was launched by a number of Armenian terrorist groups. This terror campaign claimed a total of 70 Turkish and non-Turkish lives, 524 maimed, and 105 taken as hostages in 10 years. It is unfortunate that some of the influential Armenian American organizations of today, of the present time, who are still actively lobbying against Turkey, were in complicity with those pulling triggers and exploding bombs yesterday. Now, there's another interesting point I want to draw your attention to. Interestingly, in the 1960s, the then Union of the Soviet Socialist Republics began to allow Soviet Armenians to study the genocide, which was, in the Soviet regime, in the Soviet times, strictly banned, a taboo, no nationalist feelings. Proletariat rules everything, and it's the international. In early 1960s, Moscow decided for the erection of a monument in the name of genocide, and this monument was constructed in Yerevan, the capital of the Armenian Soviet Republic then, in 1967. What was the change in the Soviet policy? Certainly, after the death of Stalin, the Union of the Soviet Socialist Republics adopted a more mild-mannered nationalities policy. That's a fact, but not to this extent. On the other hand, could it be the case that by letting Armenian nationalism to direct hatred to the Turkish enemy, Moscow was steering to prevent the rise of anti-Soviet dissident nationalism? Another pertinent question in this vein would be how they viewed the American-Armenian attitudes against Turkey, a staunch US ally during the Cold War. So, from the Russian point of view, Soviet Russian, did they also see the gains of two birds with one stone? Whatever the underlying dynamics were, since 1970s, radical sections of the Armenian diaspora in different countries have been carrying out a revanchist and racist propaganda. The United States of America is one of those countries. The Armenian diaspora in the United States is the second largest after Russia. Armenians are historically known to be well-versed in playing big powers against each other. Even today, the Armenian Republic of today, siding solidly with Russia, the new Eurasian Union of Russia, and the new Collective Security Treaty Organization, a replacement of the Warsaw Pact. They are full members, but the contacts, nevertheless, are intact with the United States of America, with the EU, and surprisingly with North Atlantic Treaty Organization, the NATO. Back in the First World War, when Tsarist Russia withdrew from war in 1917 due to the Bolshevik Revolution, it retracted from all occupied areas, including Eastern Anatolia. Armenians in the Eastern Front, in Eastern Anatolia, collaborating with the Russian army, were left on their own. And they were not late in seeking, this time, the assistance of the United States, ending with the favors of President Wilson personally. So, in the eyes of the Armenians, the United States of America is on their side, and in the views of Armenians, what we detect today, that the United States cannot remain bipartisan in this controversy. I'm not saying it is so, but this is a concept I think now imbued. Now, Turkey was definitely late in reacting to this anti-Turkish propaganda starting in the 70s. Unfortunately, giving a free leash to these activities and remaining silent inevitably led to the adage, silence stems from admission, to take roots. Then, Why was Turkey silent until the 1980s? What was behind this silence? After the occupation and partition of the remaining lands of the Ottoman Empire after the World War I, a successful liberation movement was spearheaded by Mustafa Kemal Atatürk in Anatolia. With the Treaty of Lausanne on July the 24th, 1923, the Republic of Turkey was born on the ashes of the Ottoman Empire. The new republic chose to initiate a genuinely new beginning for the people of Turkey and pushed aside the Ottoman past altogether. The people of Turkey, traumatized by decades-long wars and forced migrations, took on this new beginning willingly. This helped the people of Turkey to free themselves from the ghosts of the past, overcome past calamities, and walk through the path that leads to modernity. The founding fathers of the Republic of Turkey and the following generations had a very clear orientation. The Republic, established in 1923, was breaking away from the Ottoman heritage, opening a new chapter, a blank page, to deliver a war-torn, devastated country from scratch to the level of contemporary civilization. We had no time or intention to look back or divert our energy from achieving the clearly set goals of the Republic. The silence to Armenian allegations was not due to admission. Quite the contrary. We had to restrain ourselves from asking accounts of the past, the tragic fate of the Turks in a vast empire, a devastated country, and millions of perished compatriots. Now, the tipping point was the start of Armenian terrorism. When Armenian radical nationalist terror started, targeting Turkish diplomats and their families, Turkey could not remain silent to those heinous acts and allegations and stay aloof anymore. By 1980s, Turkey started to encourage academic research to bring out historical and legal facts to refute the circulating allegations. We started late, so we had a large gap to cover both in time and produced arguments. Yes, we were late, but our efforts were not in vain. Turkish scholars covered substantial ground in a relatively short time, with quality research and publications. Another development was that as Armenian allegations began to dominate the agenda of the international community, non-Turkish scholars also got attracted to this topic. Some of them fell under the influence of the Armenian views. Some mixed scholarship and propaganda. Some of them were employed in the Armenian-funded study programs. Some of them were deliberately educated, employed by various services of different countries. And certainly, some conducted valuable independent research. I do not want to talk about the first category. As to the last group, they are scholars holding different views, and we respect all of them as we respect scholarship, free scholarly debate, and freedom of expression. What I would like to mention is that among the scholars in the last group, there are an increasing number of scholars who discover ridiculous contradictions in the Armenian version of history, and upon that awareness produce academic studies that are on the way to reveal historical truth. Now, I know I have taken a lot of your time, but coming to more recent times, I don't want to get bogged down in history. We have to look ahead. We have to look to the future. Coming to the more recent times, I would like to draw attention to a very important development which I consider to be a breakthrough with respect to Armenian propaganda. I refer to the judgment of 17 December 2013 of the European Court of Human Rights, which is a prestigious international court of which, very important, both Turkey and Armenia are members. The decision of the European Court of Human Rights is a turning point. In December 2013, verdict of the court, 4 major Armenian propaganda trump cards were internationally and legally refuted. First, it was emphasized that a general consensus, final conclusion, and objective and absolute truth about the events propagated by Armenians do not exist and is not probable. I mean, I'm just quoting from the court verdict. I'm not making any of my own wording. Second, the court underlined that genocide is a very narrow and strictly legal concept, and the 1915 events are not legally characterized as genocide. Very clear, very unambiguous. Third, it was pointed out that only about 20 states out of the 190 in the world had resolutions adopted in one or other chamber of their parliaments recognizing the events as genocide. These were not government decisions, but decisions of the parliaments or one of their chambers, and as such, totally non-binding. This is also in the court verdict. Fourth, and this is also very important, nullifying an important element of the Armenian propaganda that equates the events of 1915 with the Holocaust of the Second World War, the court decision said these 2 cases were incompatible. Apart from these, the court stated that there could be questions of sensitive and controversial nature. However, sensitivity and controversial character of a question cannot be a reason to suppress freedom of expression. In fact, this is what differentiates democratic societies from totalitarian regimes. The court said this very clearly. From that, we can have an idea on political inclinations of some of the Armenian organizations and the Armenian state, which, by the way, intervened as a third party at the European Court of Human Rights January 28, 2015 hearing, that try hard to prevent informed debate and to criminalize views other than their own. The court's emphasis on the importance of freedom of expression invalidates the purposeful, ugly, and unfair branding of the people as denialists who reject the characterization of the 1915 events as genocide. This will help the formation of platforms of informed debate and discussions of the 1915 events that will help the people to learn the core realities of the 1915 events. Unfortunately, this is undesirable for those who try to prevent the research of these events to impose their own biased views by labels like denialist. We are now waiting for the final verdict of the Grand Chamber that took up the case again in 28th of January 2015. The year 2015 is a psychological threshold for the symbolic value of the centenary for the Armenians. So it is no surprise to witness the intensification of the Armenian allegations, accusations, and claims to make a peak. In fact, on January the 29th, Armenian president ceremonially proclaimed the Pan-Armenian Declaration on the 100th anniversary of the Armenian genocide. This declaration is available on the official website of the President of Armenia. If one reads into this declaration, one realizes how far they went, how high they raised the bar, how unrealistic claims they made. This is certainly bound to end in disillusionment. Openly referring to the unratified, invalidated Treaty of Sèvres of 1920, Armenia of today openly expresses territorial demands from another neighboring country. On the other hand, from the point of view of Turkey, the year 2015 is indeed a very important year. From a historical perspective, 2015 is the 100th anniversary of the Gallipoli War, a turning point of the First World War. And the previous speakers did mention the Gallipoli campaign, and this is very important indeed. As regards to the contemporary times, in 2015, Turkey assumed the presidency of the G20, the organization that brings the largest, biggest economies of the world together. In November the 10th this year, the summit meeting of the G20 will be held in Antalya, Turkey. This is a good indicator of the standing of Turkey in the international domain. Turkey will continue to look forward, not the past, to provide its citizens and the international community with better, more peaceful, more prosperous, more progressive conditions. My sincere hope is that, just like Turkey does, Armenia too begins to look forward for the welfare of its citizens, people of the region, and the world. Starting as early as next year, we can again work on building dialogue and efforts for reconciliation with Armenia to overcome a controversial and tragic past with fresh thinking, goodwill, and political leadership. It would serve us all if we are not captured by the past. I want to underline in conclusion that Armenians are not our enemies. Armenia is our neighbor. We have a common heritage, a shared culture. We are both members of the European family, together with Georgia and Azerbaijan in the South Caucasus. We will not cease striving to achieve good neighborly relations to the benefit of all in the South Caucasus for stability, cooperation, and prosperity. Thank you very much. Soru alabilir misin?
Any questions? I guess the food security. Yeah, okay.
Where can we find the text? Okay. My name is Zinci Bowman. I'm from Washington, D.C. Where can we find the text of the decision of the European Court of Human Rights? I think we should have that available to us readily.
I think so. I thank you very much for this question. It is important and it's easy. I mean, it is published in the website of the court. It is published in the website in internet of the Court of Human Rights. It is about an 80-page court decision. But there is, I mean, this appeared much later than the first synopsis of the decision. It's an easier reading. It's only about 5 pages. Before the decision came out in full form, a synopsis, a summary, was produced, again, by the clerk of the court, an official document. So it is for those who cannot spare reading going over 80 pages or more. There is a 5-page official synopsis also available in the website of the Court of Human Rights. And then the other text is also available to anybody in the website of the Court of Human Rights. Thank you.
Any more questions? Please.
Thank you, Ambassador, most esteemed colleague. As an acting ambassador, of course, I do very much agree with what you have said, but if you allow, I have a brief comment about history. We should be more in history rather than, looking forward exactly means to be more in history, because if you want to destroy any person's future, you will have to deal with his or her past. So we shouldn't be shy being in history. I think we should be, it is the right time to be for us also to be in history as much as the Armenians are. Secondly, I very much regret, I mean, the Turkish Republic is a success story. I do not have any doubts about that. It should be more known about, but if they made a single mistake, our founding fathers, was this closing of the past. When I was at Harvard, I ran through page by page from 1933 to the latest issue of Bulletin, the formal organ of the Turkish Historical Society. There was not a single page on the Balkan Wars. You cannot forget the Balkan Wars. Neither you can forget Libya, etc., which, by the way, started in 1911. The Balkan Wars started in 1912. This is not a way to construct future. So we are now paying the price for this because nobody knows about the Balkan War, as nobody knows the real reasons why which led Turkey into the First World War. And then we are saying that historians should discuss. We don't know what to discuss. We don't have a narrative. We are among friends now, and I can say that there is this terrible deficiency. It is not only that they started killing and we start. We should start up from 1911, the Italian assault on Libya, what happened during the Balkan Wars, and why Turkey had to take part in the First World War. Unless we do that, we will not be speaking about the real context of the 1915 massacres and all that. So I think we failed. I will, tomorrow in my speech, I will elaborate on that, but basically, I shouldn't be biting into other people's time, but we failed in expanding our argumentation, in deepening our argumentation, so much so that now the so-called better intellectuals of the Turkish intelligentsia believe that there was a genocide. This is the end result, and this is very unfortunate, but we should be, in that sense, of course, looking to the future. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. I think as a historian yourself, I mean as an ambassador, but as a historian too, because very recently, I do not know if the audience here has heard about it, you have a very voluminous book on those times called The Just Memory, and you elaborate in that book all what you have briefly mentioned, so it's a must reading. But I disagree, if you permit me, on one occasion. We did not fail. We were late, but we did not fail. I say this very clearly. Again, I will refer to this very recent international court judgment saying, for example, in one part of it, I mean, I quote more or less from memory, but I cannot be 100% all words, but the court decision said, there was an argument that the international public as well as academia took this event as indisputable, whereas only part of international public and only part of academia were of that view. There is an equally large and equally valid public as well as academia with works who say otherwise. So it cannot be taken as a consensus existing there. So this in itself shows that we have covered some ground. We have not failed, but we were late. Thank you.
Any more questions?
Thank you.
Second.
My name is Sevgin Oktay. I'd like to take this opportunity to thank you for a beautiful condensed version of the events since the First World War. I agree with Mr. Altay that perhaps one could also go further back than the First World War, but the fact of the matter is that, as you have rightly pointed it out, that we were late in responding to the Armenian defining us. I think that's one of the problems that perhaps we may have had, but I think we are caught up with that, and that is we let the Armenians define us, and then we've been playing their game. So I think we need to define our game to defeat them, I would think. And in that sense, I think, as you just pointed out, in 2015, there were another important event that took place, and that was the Gallipoli situation. And in that, there were the Anzac and the Turks who were fighting each other, and yet again, since that time, they've been the best friends ever. So I think nowadays, United Nations is grappling with the idea of conflict resolution. I think we could be sort of advertising that and showing how the Turks were able to resolve this conflict and study the mechanism of that, and so that it could be also applicable to other situations of conflict that exists in our world today. So thank you for your beautiful presentation of the events since that time.
Thank you very much for these comments. And what your comments reminded me of also another, I would say, issue that I feel obliged to remind you or inform you. There is this motion picture by Russell Crowe, The Water Diviner. It will be I think, in the United States in the screens 24th of April, by coincidence or by design, I do not know. But I think that is a must to be seen by all of you. And another issue related to our topic here, there is not one single passage, a word of Armenia, Armenian, or nothing with Armenians, but it is a very clear message to show the whole world what Turkey, the Turks, were doing during the World War. They had no time or intention to do anything to Armenians. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Yes, yes, indeed.
One
Indeed.
more question, Kürşat Bey.
What was the population, number of people who were killed by Armenians? The numbers you mentioned, I didn't hear that.
The terror campaign. Yes. Let me. I have to refer to my notes. Yes. No, let me. 518,105.
Hello,
Any more questions?
Şurada bir tane.
my name is Erkin Baker from St. Louis, and I like to say it's better late than never. Yes. We may be late, but we are here. And number two, I cannot understand why our side is not capitalizing on the results of the Malta trials. There was an international tribunal, and Turks were not found guilty, and I don't hear enough about it. Thank you.
Well, again, Malta trials indeed, Madam, was very important. Because of the time restraint, I could not go to all details, but that is a very important piece, again, to clear out the Turkish name, because there, the Allied forces, the British took those Turks to these islands for a trial, and Istanbul was under British occupation. All the archives, all the files were at the disposal of the British, and the British also asked other Allied countries, the United States included, for any evidence to sentence these people, and none were found. So that is another legal absolution of the events. Thank you.
Yes.
John Gardner, avid friend of Turkey and a retired naval intelligence officer. There are a couple of groups apart from the Armenians who ought to be recognized as complicit in this problem, not necessarily to be used publicly in the campaign to counter the Armenian propaganda, but rather to fully understand what went on. Number one, the British War Propaganda Office of World War I was totally devoted to undermining any opposing government, the German, the Turks, anybody else, and they had no license to stick to the truth. They were just propagandizing to provoke the British and American and other publics to be against the wartime enemies. Secondly, I think many of us realize that much of the impetus for the Armenian hostility to the Turks, both exemplified by their conduct with the Russians during the war and by the propaganda afterwards, is the direct result of American evangelicals who were working avidly before and during World War I to stir up this kind of enmity. But finally, I was going to mention the same point that this lady mentioned. I'll just add one codicil to what she said that I totally agree with. During the tribunal at Malta, the British government was appalled that they couldn't find any evidence to
Indeed.
support the allegations. So they went to the U.S. State Department and said, gee, don't you guys have something that we can use as evidence against these people? The response of the U.S. State Department was, gee, we looked and looked, but we couldn't find anything credible. All of the statements against the Turks came from people who had no first-hand knowledge, but just made judgments about what was in the minds of the Turkish officials without any corroborating evidence.
Well, thank you very much. No comments to your remarks. Thank you.
I guess that's all.
Bir tane daha şurada var.
Please.
Well, thank you very much for a very comprehensive description that puts the case in a very strong way. I think what's happening to Turkey and Turks is not that because we are right or we are a just cause, but we're losing the publicity and propaganda battle. I mean, I came to this country in 1965. I was a fresh university graduate. I didn't know anything about the Armenian issue or many other issues. It was not taught in the history books. You know, I had to learn everything here. And I think the same thing exists in Turkey. I have a summer home there. I go and talk to Turkish people. They got all kinds of strange ideas. They don't know nobody. You know, I mean, this Armenian issue is a lost issue in Turkey. They're not interested. It's all football games and that kind of stuff going on. I'm not kidding. So I mean, the job we need to do is publicity. And we have to stop these resolutions coming from Congress. In America especially, we have to stop this bad propaganda and presentations by even some Turkish people who go support the Armenian cause here. And that takes a lot of work, money, and effort. That's what we're missing. We're not devoting enough resources to solve this problem. We're just sitting down and doing nothing. I mean, we're doing something, but well, the government is not in this game. I'm sorry.
Well, again, I was trying to explain why we were late, why we did not want to deal with this issue, and I totally share your observation that in Turkey this is not a problem. I mean, there was no such problem for Turks. But on the other hand, we are also making progress in, I wouldn't say gaining public opinion, but neutralizing. It would be, I mean, I'm not that optimistic or ambitious to gain particularly the Western public opinion. I think it's next to impossible, but we can neutralize. Thank you.
All right. One more. This is the last question, sir.
You go ahead, I asked. You go ahead if you want to.
I just wanted to ask you for an update on what's happening with the European Court of Human Rights. Where does it stand? What
Very
are
good.
the key issues?
This is a very relevant and very actual question, I mean, of actuality. The European Court of Human Rights, as I mentioned, did pass on this verdict very late in December 2013. So normally, let me go into the working of the court. Normally, the court decisions, when they are announced, take, I think, 6 months to be final. And the country that is being sentenced, in this case Switzerland, has the right to come against, I don't say appeal because there is no system of appellation, but to object to this decision. And what happened is that Switzerland, and this is I would say not official, but we know it from very well. The Swiss in the very beginning said, okay, we agree with the court decision, so be it. We will we will change our laws. But this is something I wanted to tell you. 2015, the date for the Armenians was not 24th of April. It was the 18th of January. Why? Because for Armenians, for Armenian cause, for Armenian allegations, this Court of Human Rights verdict almost did away with all their arguments, with all their gains. It collapsed the whole thing. So the Armenians used everything within their means, financial, political, religious in the sense what I'm saying religious. For example, the Catholicos of Ejmiatsin, the Gregorian Church of Armenia. The Catholicos at the moment is also, by coincidence, the president of the World Council of Churches in Geneva, Switzerland. And World Council of Churches came out with a declaration that this court decision had to be repealed. So in that sense, the Armenians did everything, but everything within their means, setting aside all other concerns for 2015, but this court verdict. And Switzerland, at the very last moment, the very last day of their period of appeal or objection, came with an objection to the court. What the rules of the Court of Human Rights is that when the country in question objects, then 5 judges see the merits of this objection, and if they agree with the objection, then what is called a grand chamber. The court is usually, not usually, I mean, the first instance court is 7 judges, and the 7 judges passed on this verdict. And interestingly, one of those judges were also the Swiss judge, and who voted for against our country. So what happened is that this case, there is no appeal, will be reviewed, retried at the Grand Chamber. And it did take place on the 28th of January. And maybe you might have heard in the news that the Armenian side had 3 lawyers represented, and one of them was Mrs. Clooney, I think. And the other one was Sir Robertson, who are I mean, the jurists will have to decide on that, but who were not there on the merits of a legal case, but I think a public show to again play to the sentiments of the public opinion. Now we are waiting for the final verdict of the court. In these cases, the court usually takes these. I mean, when a case goes to the Grand Chamber, it means it's a very special case, so it usually takes 3 to 6 months for the final decision. But our educated guess is that the court will not come up with the final verdict in this controversial year of 2015, not to be pulled into the polemics of Turkish-Armenian issues. So we do not expect a verdict, the final verdict, before the end of this year or early next year. And until that date, the verdict of the first instance is valid. And that's why I'm emphasizing so much on that. Thank you.
Thank you. India, you are the last.
Oh, okay. About 10 years ago, I was in Istanbul and I attended a meeting at the Atatürk Cultural Center in Taksim. And this meeting was organized by the Türk Dünyası Araştırma Vakfı, Turkish World Research Foundation. And this huge auditorium was full. And there were a lot of the descendants of the victims of Armenians, you know. And I've always wondered why the Turkish government did not use these people as, you know, as evidence, because there's a lot of emotion in Turkey. You know, there are thousands, probably millions of people in Turkey who lost a relative to the Armenian atrocities. Why aren't we using these? These are, you know, people emotions. People react to people's emotions. This would be such an asset for the Turkish government. I don't know. And these people also are organized, I know. And then someone said, I think it might have been my American friend, why doesn't the Turkish government send some of these people to the United States to go around and talk?
I mean, thank you very much for the question, but this is not how we view this thing. I mean, we are not after vengeance, vendetta, or to go back history and start accounting. And it will not be only limited with Armenians for that, as a matter of fact. What we are after, we look to the future. We look to live in harmony, in good neighborly relations. And in Turkey also, we have about 60,000 Turks of Armenian origin living mostly in Istanbul. But a number equal to that or even more now are in Turkey, Armenians coming, most of them illegally from Armenia and working in Turkey. So this is what I'm saying. We are not after punishing Armenians or vendetta against Armenians. We want to live in peace and good neighborly relations with Armenians. We don't want to boil up old sentiments.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. This was an excellent speech. I personally learned quite a bit from the historical facts and also the Turkish position. It was fascinating. I hope that we take this speech and put it in a paper and we use it. So I also have some brochures that actually is published by AVIM, which the Ambassador Kılıç is director of. So please, you can pick it up over here too. Thank you. So we're going to have a break till 2 o'clock.